All right, welcome everyone to the Music Equity Chat Show, a show for music educators to go beyond the surface so we have deeper conversations about how we can reimagine music education to be diverse, inclusive, and culturally responsive for all of our students. I'm Ashley Cuthbertson, and I'm your host of the Music Equity Chat Show. I'm a music educator and also the founder and CEO of Cuthbertson, a consulting company where we specialize with music educators in centering equitable and culturally responsive practices in their curriculum and instruction so that they can build and maintain high quality music programs where all of our young musicians are thriving. Our Music Equity Chat Show is live bi-weekly, just like we are right now, every other Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So if you have not already, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can also follow me on your favorite social media platform. All of my social handle links are on my website, www.ashleycuthbertson.com. All right, so like I said before, our Music Equity Chat Show, we get into it. We are having the deep conversations that often are just not being had in music education. There's a lot of very surface level conversations, and honestly, a lot of the same kind of discussions that are going around. But if we are going to push forward to a more equitable future in our music education spaces, then we need to have deeper conversations. And so that's why I'm so excited for tonight's conversation about why we need to be having these difficult conversations in music ed with my very special guest, Dr. Marshaun Hymon. Welcome, Marshaun. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Ashley, thank you so much. I appreciate you inviting me and really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, awesome. I'm so excited. So Marshaun and I actually connected several months ago because I kind of slid into his DMs on LinkedIn like I often am off to do because I love connecting with people and getting to know new folks. And I noticed that Marshaun was presenting at our Virginia MEA conference back in November. And then even before that, I noticed that he was, I think was it Delaware, I think was the
it was
first time.
Delaware, yeah.
Yeah, we were presenting together, not together, but at the same conference in Delaware. And so I thought, let me reach out to Marshaun. He's doing some similar things to me, but focused more in the DEI space. And so I'm really excited for you to bring your expertise in your music education kind of background, also your DEI background to this conversation. So I think it's going to be really rich. So let's kick it off. Marshaun, how about you first? Just tell the people a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. I'm really excited to be here and to engage with you all. My name is Dr. Marshaun Hymon. I am the co-founder and managing partner of True Change Alliance. That is a change management consulting firm, and we focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I began my career as a public school music educator, but as Ashley mentioned, I've branched off and had experience in nonprofit. I've done some work in higher education and really take a look at a holistic view of DEI with corporate, nonprofit, whatever it might be, to help leaders and organizations move these practices forward. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about my experience as a music educator, but also now my experience as a DEI consultant, because I think both are important and both have a really interesting intersection.
Yeah, awesome. And I agree. I think that the background of both kind of places is both kind of at kind of a boiling point right now. I feel like there's a lot of discussions around, I'm sure, when things in 2020 were really kind of heating up, I'm sure a lot of things were happening for the work that you're doing. And then I think also music ed experience back in 2020 and that summer kind of a reckoning of sorts, which I think now it's 2020, it's February 2023. I think I find myself often wondering, okay, a lot of statements happened back in 2020. We had a lot of big stands that people were making. I wonder now, I guess almost 3 years later, I wonder where have we gone with some of those things, some of those promises that folks have made. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about what led you to this work. I know, you, as you said, you started in the public schools teaching music, but what kind of led you to focus more on the DEI space?
Yeah, so in all the sectors that I worked in, I observed similar challenges, whether it be the student experience in school and those student outcomes. There was, disparate outcomes for students of color versus white students or other groups. And then as I started working in nonprofit and being a leader in that space, I saw similar challenges with the staff experience and staff performance and perceptions of staff of color and things like that. So I began to serve on diversity committees, and I was leading, DEI committees, and really trying to drive this work forward for free, by the way, doing this kind of as a part of my job. And at that particular time, as a Black person, it was really a race focus for me. But I moved to California and met a lot of different people who were not just Black or white or Asian or what it might be, but a lot of mixed race folks. I met a lot of people who identified on the gender spectrum, who identified on the social or the sexual orientation spectrum, and my worldview just really expanded exponentially. And I grew up a Christian, right? So it was kind of these two opposing things existing in one place, where my belief system said this, my experience in the world said something different, and I had to kind of wrestle with what it means to show up as a Christian in a way that respects people's humanity and value in the world. And that was a very, very long journey. And it was, and at some point, I kind of reckoned with the cognitive dissonance, if you will, where Monday through Friday, I advocated for people's value and inherent value in the world. And then on Sunday, I espoused a different belief system. And that worked for a little bit, but eventually, the cognitive distance came back, and I had to really reckon with what do I actually believe and what's shifting in me. And I had to say to myself, if I truly believe that every single person has inherent value and brings that to the world, then I need to show up differently. Right. And as I began to reflect, I realized that I, in fact, had been causing harm to folks. So I do this work not to blame or shame or anything like that, but to help folks see how their current perspectives might be causing harm. And if it is, how might we shift to ensure that everyone has a positive experience at work, but also in the world. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what led me to doing the work that I do full time now.
Yeah. And I love that you shared that piece of your story, that you kind of had a reckoning within yourself that you had to undergo as far as your beliefs as a Christian, but also this other work that you were doing. And I see, I see a couple of viewers. Somebody asked, what is DEI? DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So having to kind of hold both of those things at the same time. And I find sometimes when I'm working with folks, because I also work not in the DEI sectors per se, but also under that umbrella of like music education and how do we apply DEI. I would say that often when I talk with folks and they're thinking about like, how do I make sure that I am being affirming and valuing to all of my students? I think a lot of times it can be hard for folks to think of things not as being an either or kind of conversation, but instead being a both and. Like we can hold multiple different values and beliefs at the same time. And there might even be moments like you shared where there are some values and beliefs that are deep seated, like as we were raised, that are now kind of in opposition to new ideas. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. I don't know that I always feel like, even though there might be that opposition, I don't know that there's not space to hold both thoughts at the same time and both kinds of things. What are your thoughts about that as you yourself have gone through having to hold thoughts that sometimes are not supposed to be in the same space?
Right. No, I think I agree mostly. I think it's a yes and. I think generally there's absolutely, it's possible to hold competing perspectives or thoughts in the same place. And I think that's just a human experience. The part that I'll push on a little bit is, as diversity, equity, and inclusion, as a DEI expert or practitioner, if I believe that every person has value and deserves to be loved and respected, it becomes somewhat difficult to hold a belief that they do and they don't at the same time, right? So I think that's the small piece that I have and continue to reckon with. And I will say, as an educator, it is possible to respect someone, create space for them, and have a different perspective, right? And I think it's okay if that's existing in our classrooms at this moment.
Yeah, but I love that you push back. I think the important part of what you said, though, is regardless of those competing thoughts or different beliefs, it's about how do we value and affirm the people that we're working with that are in front of us. I think that's ultimately what we're all trying to do. At least that's what I'm trying to do, is how do I support the music educators that I come into contact with and that I'm supporting. like regardless of the various beliefs and value systems might be happening, right? The various cultures, how do we make sure that as the adults in the room that we are creating a learning container that just values and affirms all of the people that are within? And I think sometimes it can be hard to decenter oneself in order to like really have that self-reflective, critical self-thought around what do I really believe? Where are my frames of reference maybe influencing me to not hold the best space for the human beings in front of me? And I think when I work with music educators, I usually work with them around like music curriculum and instruction, but I think people are surprised because what I learned was that when I used to do lots of curriculum development projects, both like in my own school district for other projects, and then at the state in Virginia, I did lead several curriculum teams as we were going under revisions for the new standards. And as I was doing all these different projects, what I learned was that one, I'm really good at curriculum development. And I love it because I love showing music educators what's possible when we decenter like just skills, technique only kind of teaching, which is very basic, and really incorporate that along with like contextual, how do we help students to use this music to understand other things? And what I found, and I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on this too, is that I couldn't just do curriculum development for people. I had to start reframing thoughts of mine first, because what I learned was it didn't matter how great the curriculum I developed was when I handed it over. If people didn't fundamentally think and reframe their thoughts, the way they were teaching it was not the direction I was trying to go when I created it. And so I learned that when I created kind of the framework that I utilize for my folks that I train, it actually doesn't start with curriculum or repertoire. It starts with these reframes that we have to do around equitable frames of reference and how we are developing learning environments. What are your thoughts about that and some of the work that you're doing? I think that it really connects, I think, to some of the work that you're doing, since you focus more on that DEI piece. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, interesting. So this is actually an ongoing conversation, and I think we're using similar language, but in the work that I do, we use the language mindset change or mindset shift, and then practice change. Right, that in order to really make an impact, educators and leaders must have a mindset shift and then also implement practices that advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the not a debate, but the conversation is like, which comes first? Like, is there a direction? Like, does mindset shift have to come before practice change, or can practice change come before mindset shift? And I don't know the answer, but what I'm wrestling with right now, I guess kind of internally, is at the end of the day, do I care if someone truly believes in the practices that we're doing, or do I care most that students are protected and valued and have a great experience at school? And I think both are important, but at the end of the day, do I care if someone changes their mind or if they are protecting and valuing students? And I don't know just yet. So I think both are important, but I don't know if one direction is best, or frankly, if mindset shift is fully needed. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm wrestling with the same thing. I'm wrestling with the same thing too, because as I continue to work with different school district music teams and school district teams all over right now I'm traveling in Boston. I was telling you, like, once I travel and do different things, I'm coming in more contact with people that are attracted to my message because they've already done some DEI work, right? So they've already started this work of critical reflection. They've already started this work of like really trying to understand what at a bigger level, what does it mean to be diverse, to be inclusive, and to hold equitable space. And so what I'm finding is I'm doing more like practice work with those school districts that there's no reason for me to come in and like redo stuff when they've already started to have those shifts. And I still wonder, because I wonder the same thing, like, does it need to be like one has to happen before the other? Because ultimately we need teachers to go in the classroom and to teach. Like, at the end of the day, they got to teach, whether they got a mindset change or not. And so I'm really wrestling with, how do I make sure that the work I'm doing still supports the like bottom line that teachers have and that districts have for their music teachers and their programs, and knowing that the true practice, I don't know that the true practice can really shift without the mindset. And then another thought I've been having is, at what point do we need like accountability measures to kind of hold people to practices while their mindset shifts are kind of catching up? Is that like a teacher evaluation? Maybe so. Maybe there needs to be aspects of teacher evaluation that account for some of these like practices that would only happen on one teacher's own if they had, you know what I mean, that they had the mindset shift. I'm not really sure either, because I'm still wrestling with that of like, does there have to always be the same starting place for everybody, or do we, as somebody who values everybody has to start where they are, right, in their journey, do I maybe start in different places and put other kinds of things in place while the other mindset stuff is kind of catching up? Because in some situations, like the house is on fire, they just got to figure out how are we going to make sure that we're supporting the kids, getting the kids back into our programs. And it's like, we got to put the fire out. Can we get the practices in place maybe right now and then kind of catch it up? I'm still wrestling with that myself as I continue to make sure that what I'm doing is flexible enough for the variety of teachers and the journeys that they might be on.
Yeah. I like what you just said, the idea of creating practice change, accountability measures while folks are moving through that mindset shift process. And I think at the beginning, it might feel like accountability or like mandates or punishments, whatever it might be. But I think as people move along that spectrum on shifting their mindset, it might feel like support, right? Like, oh, these measures are here to ensure I stay on track. So I like that frame. You're convincing me that mindset shift. I mean, I know it's important, but like, I'm you know, I know it's important, but I'm beginning to think like, is it fully necessary? But I like the idea of holding folks accountable while they come along. Yeah. Okay. I'm thinking.
Yeah, but I believe just like our kids need to have a purpose and a clear meaning for the work that they're doing, I think our teachers also do. And so I think maybe one of the many difficult conversations that I think we're not having in music education in a bigger sense is, what do we do when we have teachers who are really resistant to moving towards equitable approaches in their classroom, and instead want to research tells us that the traditional way of teaching, like regardless of discipline, the traditional teacher in the front of the room, this kind of empty vessel, like we know that doesn't work. Research tells us that. And we still have teachers in all kinds of disciplines in music that are still teaching that way. And so I think a bigger conversation, a difficult one, we're here to talk about difficult conversations that we're not having. I think that's one of like, what are we actually really doing? We're talking a lot about, like, I know the National Association for Music Education even has like a whole section about equity. That's a big part of their strategic plan that I just was looking at that a few weeks ago. And I wonder, like, and what are we putting in place to start to hold people accountable, right? So what are we doing? And accountability, I think, can feel scary for people. I don't think it needs to be scary. And I also think that it's hard to take a bold stance, knowing that there's going to be, like, anybody that does anyone that does any sort of DEI or equity work, there's going to be pushback. Like that's part of the work that we're doing. And I wonder, how are we navigating through that pushback and still making sure that the bigger statement, the bigger goal that we're trying to reach is still being met? I feel like that's one of the many difficult conversations I feel like we're not having, is what do we do when teachers are just being very resistant to making these changes? What do you think about that?
Yeah. I think it's important that districts or schools set kind of expectations, right? So you mentioned like the statement, right? That our expectation is that we create equitable spaces or inclusive spaces. And then I think there needs to be evaluation systems in place. And I'm not sure if the current teacher evaluation models account for inclusive behaviors and teacher behaviors that support equitable environments. But I think that should be a part of the evaluation process. Less about gotcha moments, but this is good teaching, and this is how you create those environments. And just like we evaluate teachers, I think that should be dependent upon someone being able to be rated proficient or excellent. I don't know all the terminology; everything changes, right? But I think that should be that should impact someone's performance rating, right, and their ability to. And I don't want to say like keep their employment, because that's a strong statement, but like whatever happens if you are not performing as an educator, that should also be a part of the evaluation process as well. And then at the end of the day, I think it also should be implemented in the interview process. So before teachers get into the classroom, how do we assess their current mindset, before they enter? Or maybe if they're not fully where we want them to be, do we set them with a mentor or a coach, or how do we set them up at the very beginning to ensure that as they enter the classroom, they're already beginning that mindset shift journey? And there's some sort of check-in process, right, that we are ensuring they're continuing on. And I'm sure there's a lot of PD that's happened now, but there should be intentional PD sessions to help teachers create those environments in their classrooms and just continuous learning and accountability that way. So those are some initial thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I think unfortunately a way to kind of, I guess, hold everybody kind of accountable is to have to use the evaluation, which I know in some instances, in some places, the teacher evaluation can be very empowering kind of feeling. Like it really depends on what I'm finding. It depends upon the relationship that teacher has with whoever the evaluator is, not necessarily like the evaluation system, but like what is the way that the evaluator is applying it? Are they applying it with support, or are they applying it kind of like in a punitive kind of way? Then I think the accountability of the evaluation does start to feel scary for teachers. But I hope, anyway, for me, that the evaluation is just a way for teachers to know like how they're doing and to get some feedback, and for administrators also to kind of get an idea of how teachers are doing in their classroom, which I feel like is just part of professional practice of like reflecting and that ongoing reflection on oneself and on their practice. But it worries me a little bit when I know that some of the ways forward is by like accountability methodology, like evaluation. It worries me that I know so many teachers, unfortunately, music teachers have had really negative experiences with the evaluation process. And so I guess, not that I don't think it's not possible or that it shouldn't happen. I think it absolutely should. And I think that we need to be mindful of like, how do we maybe support some of those administrators to make sure that the way that they're applying some of those evaluative measures don't feel punitive to the teachers, but rather feel like, no, this is just part of being a teacher and being a professional, really, of like, you need to be reflecting on your practice, reflecting on the impact that you're having ultimately on kids, because that's what we're here to do. And so I don't know that I have the answer to like, how do we support maybe administrators in applying those evaluative measures in a less scary way? Because I think that, I mean, I totally agree. That's the way forward, right? Like we just have to hold people accountable to doing the things and make sure that we train them on an ongoing basis, not just a one and done workshop. Like, okay, great. We did a little culture and now we're done.
Exactly. Exactly.
We talked about bias. Okay, now we're done. Like there needs to be like ongoing professional learning and support for teachers to be able to do that. But I mean, I think that's like a big, difficult thing that I think that we're just not talking about in music ed, because I think music teachers become music teachers because we love music and we're excited to share the joy. And I often ask people when I do like sessions for them, like who agrees that music is for everyone and that music is important. Like everybody always raises their hands. And I know that the practices that we're utilizing in our classrooms are misaligned sometimes with those beliefs that music teachers have, as far as like believing that it really is for everyone. Then we have to make sure that it's accessible for everybody.
Yeah, 100%. You know, and I think, and I'm guilty of this myself. Often we go in to, and I actually think you said something similar, but you go in like to teach music. And I think a more inclusive approach would be to understand that like all kids don't want to be there just for music, right? But like music can be a tool to teach other things, right? Life skills or empathy, collaboration, understanding, whatever it might be. But that being used as a tool to help advance a student's connection to other classes or to things out in their life, or could really improve them as human beings rather than just music for music's sake, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think exactly what you just said is like another like thing that I feel like people are not talking about, like the idea that we teach music for music's sake. Well, then what do we do for kids for whom learning about music is like not their thing? I mean, music is innately a part of the human experience.
Course,
but I also think, just like you said, we have kids who like learning about music is not their thing. Partially, I think because we have not demonstrated for them like the mattering part of music. And so how do we make sure that, how do we teach in a way that is not just music for music's sake, but how do we teach in a way that is really music for everyone? I think that we have to stop teaching music for music's sake. I think we have to think about the thing you just said. How do we use music as a vehicle to get these like life skills, being able to collaborate with people that maybe don't have the same beliefs as you, being able to, I don't know, communicate even in a rough moment where you're trying to say one thing and the person you're talking to isn't agreeing. Like, how do you not have a meltdown? How do you like communicate through that rough spot? Problem solve. Like, I feel like when we think about, and I think that's culturally responsive teaching, right? Which is what I teach for music teachers. And how do we hook into like the frames of reference of our kids, their prior, knowledge and experience and their interest? How do we start there and then use music to get them to understand these things that really connect to their life? Because I don't know that really teaching, maybe this is like controversial to say, but I don't know that teaching like a scale is like that. Like, who cares in your life other than someone who's going to be a musician? Who really needs to know like a scale? But can we use that scale as a skill that support a concept that supports something else that we're doing? I wonder if we just shift the focus from just the narrow, basic kind of concepts and skills to these bigger ideas that really transform music, but are concepts that just in life that we need to know.
Right.
I really think that might be that is the way that we make it really for all of our students to at least have a pathway to music. Maybe they don't choose to elect, to take a music class, but at least they can see, okay, we're not just playing the violin here. Like, we're actually learning stuff that like matters for my life.
Yeah, 100%. I'm with you, and I don't think that's controversial or blasphemy at all.
Okay, good. I really think that's how we make it for everybody, is that we have to consider that there of course are the kids who are like us that like will love, learning music, whatever we do. And then there's kids who are like kind of one foot in, one foot out. And then there's kids that I think, especially at the secondary level, because a lot of times secondary programs are elective, right? Like, not everybody has to take music. I think that there's kids at the secondary level we never see in any of our programs because they don't see anything in music that has anything to do with them. Like, they don't want to play maybe an instrument, and the school only offers like the big three: band, choir, and orchestra. They don't really see themselves there. They also don't see themselves in like the music that's being taught or the kinds of concert programming. And so if we're going to really say, music for everyone, what are we doing for that other group of kids to at least have a pathway if they want to do something that's involved in music?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Awesome. So I think I kind of, I know we had questions, but I kind of went off track because we had just a.
No, I'm down with it.
But I'm curious, are you thinking of other kinds of difficult conversations that maybe are not being had that should be had in terms of music ed?
Yes. So there's one. I think the conversation has begun, but I haven't seen a lot of action. And it's this idea of, and this is kind of a specific conversation, but removing sight reading exams from the all-state exam. There are some states that are beginning to talk about this, but from my knowledge, I'm not sure if there's any state that has done that, or there are very few. I actually just submitted a journal article about this, so pray for me, y'all, if you're out there. But I think it's important that we consider why sight reading is required as a part of that exam, and specifically, a lot of states require that students know the music before they arrive for that weekend at Allstate. Right. So if students should know the music, why are we testing their ability to sight read? And I think it goes from not necessarily that students can't learn or anything like that, but oftentimes students don't have the opportunity to gain that particular skill set, especially if someone walks in as a junior or senior in your choir class. If they can produce a nice choral tone, they collaborate with the choir, they can sit down and listen and work with you and learn that music. Why should we prevent them from having an amazing experience if they can perform well at the event? So that's one thing that I think has started to kind of creep up, but I love to actually see some action behind that. I think another is gendered ensemble names. Again, I've kind of heard this a little bit, but as we really think about the gender spectrum, how do we ensure that folks, regardless of their identity and regardless of their vocal range, right, can belong in a choir? So maybe rather than women's or men's, maybe is it treble, is it bass, or I don't know. I don't have the exact answer, but I think we need to be thinking about what those names are and how they ensure that people belong in the space. I think connected to that is like gendered uniforms, right? I think that conversation definitely has begun, but A lot of professional choirs I see are going just kind of dress how you want, right? Like you look nice, but dress as you want. But I think at the high school level, middle school level, we're still seeing the dress and the tux, right? So like, how do we begin to create a space where folks can wear what's best for them, right? Or and how do we support them in getting that attire? There's a couple of things that come to mind. I don't know. Any reactions, I guess, so far?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the second point that you just made about the gendered ensembles, it made me think of, I was just at in Arizona for their conference last weekend, and I was sitting in a session where they were talking about Title IV funds, but they were then talking about in the area where this particular school where they're located, they have a lot of indigenous Native students. And so the idea of like wearing all Black for a concert was just not really like making sense or working, not just for the students, but also for like the family and the communities that were coming. And so instead they said, well, what is this, the idea, the concert is supposed to just be it's not a normal event, right? It's an event that is special. We want to treat it special. So what do you wear that for a time that's special? And the kids said, well, we wear our traditional wear. Like that's what we wear for a special day. So instead of just saying this is what we wear for a concert, they open it up to say the concert is a special event. What kinds of clothing can you wear that makes you feel like you're coming to a special event? I love that. And it was so simple. I was like, that makes so much sense to just let it be. It kind of changes the frame of mind, I think, from the concert needs to be this kind of way to this is the point. The reason why we're doing this is to have a time where we come together as a community. And so how can our dress signify that? And I think I'm sure it sparked probably a bigger conversation with that director and their students than they shared, because they weren't talking about that. That was just like a byproduct of the conversation. But I can imagine that the students felt very much like they were partners in the designing of the concert because they had a say in how they dressed and what that meant to them. And I also made me think of like for the community members for whom, for their culture, seeing people in all Black like that doesn't mean anything to them. But when they see their kids wearing their traditional wear, now they know the point of this event is to have a special time for our community to come together. And I was like, more people need to be doing things like that. That makes so much sense, because really we don't all need to wear the same clothes, because that's not the point of the concert. The concert is not to wear Black clothes. The point is to have a special event. And I was like, that makes so much sense. I love that. And then on the point of like the non-gendering of it, you wear whatever you feel like is going to make you feel like this is a special event. It doesn't have to be about who wears what kind of dress. It's about, are you wearing clothes that reflects the kind of event that we're having?
Yeah. Man, I'm loving this. So like two things come up as you mentioned that. I think one is like, I think we wear all Black, the conductor wears all Black. There's a Black piano, like everything is like muted. And it's the idea that like it's music for music's sake again, right? But if we actually decenter music from it and we think about what's the actual purpose of what we're doing, we then can have the conversation that you just mentioned. So I love that. And then it also brings up for me, the connection that I'm making is like, this is a special moment. So what would you wear for a special moment? Similarly, the idea of, I just lost my train of thought. Oh no. It's gone. Maybe it'll come back.
That's all right. We'll come back. Okay. And then the first thing that you said about the sight reading, and I agree that that discussion I think is starting to happen more, because I'm noticing when I go to different places, like, okay, they are talking about it, but it's still a lot of talk. Like, I don't know that I've seen any, maybe you have, I don't know that I've seen any all-state ensembles that have actually clarified the point of the sight reading, especially when the kids have to come with a prepared piece. So I agree with you. They're having to come with a prepared piece to audition to get into the ensemble. And also when they go to the ensemble, they have to be prepared to perform those pieces there. I'm hearing the conversation about when we take out sight reading, it allows more equitable access for kids for whom they can get ready to perform that piece. They can perform at the level of that ensemble, but having to be put on the spot to read right now in the moment is not going to be able to really assess their skills. that conversation is happening, and I'm like, who's going to be brave enough to actually like put some action and do it? Because I'm like, I hear that people are getting the point. The point is we want to have, and I'm not of the opinion that we should do away with like all state or all districts. I think kids that are really excited about performing music at a high caliber, I think that they need a place too, right? And so I'm not against having those kind of ensembles, and I'm not against the audition itself. I think that the audition just needs to be clarified. What is the point? If the point of the ensemble is that we want to have a place for these kids who are really excelling at music and they're ready for more concentrated study, and they already have the meaning and the purpose. They're ready to be in an environment. Like I remember myself, I was in my districts, all district and all region and all like I did all of that, and it was very like life altering to be within my peers who also were like excited like to nerd out with music stuff with kids who were my age. Like it was very powerful for me. And so I think if we want more kids to have access to that kind of experience, we have to really evaluate, why are we still making kids sight read who can demonstrate to us that they have the skills? And I wonder, like, who's going to be brave enough to actually act on that? That's what I'm looking for. Like, who's going to be brave enough to stand up and say, you know what, this makes no sense. The kids can perform. They have prepared for the audition, right? They have to do a prepared piece in most states, not all of them, but most states have to do a prepared piece, and then they have to prepare the repertoire ahead of time. But who's going to be brave enough, right? I think that's the question of who's going to do it.
Yeah,
that's a challenge.
I agree.
Who's going to be the brave one? What state's going to be first?
Okay, I agree, and I think one particular challenge might be, well, I guess oftentimes the sight reading exam serves as a filtering tool, right? We can cut down 30% of kids in a weekend, right? Like that, you know. And if that is actually what's happening, how do we? I don't like my language right now, but how do we filter more equitably, right? Like, how do we ensure that we are making the best selection in a way that allows the most students the opportunity to enter the space? And to your point, if sight reading is some sort of proxy, is it about finding those who are really motivated and excited about music? I think there's some other ways we can determine that. It might take more time. It might take a shifting of our system, but like, how do we determine what it is we're actually trying to measure? So I'm looking forward to that first state to do it. So, and actually, and my thought just came back. So you mentioned, so students coming as they are. So a lot of times teachers will ask, especially teachers who are like white educators will ask, can we perform a spiritual, right? Or if someone is not Latin, like, can we perform Latin music? And I always say, like, yes, like all music is for everybody. I think it's important that we think about the appropriation versus appreciation line, right? But music is for everybody. And I think it's really important that we teach our students the culture of the piece, the context, the history of the piece. But then oftentimes, if you're not a Black person, you may not directly connect to a spiritual, right? But like, if we help our students understand the purpose of the piece, is it about overcoming struggle? Is it joy? Is it celebration? Is it grief? Is it pain? Like, what is the purpose? And then ask our students to connect to a time that they've experienced that emotion and apply that to performing the piece, assuming I understand the context and the culture of this piece, and I can perform it in a way that's really culturally sound. So just wanted to say that.
Yeah, and I love that, and I think that that's a really important point. So I'm so glad your thought came back to you, because I think that's a really big question that I've been asked as well. Of what do I do if I'm a white? It's usually a white teacher asking me. I have Black students or I have Latinx students. How do I still bring their music or music of other places to my students when I don't reflect that? And I 100% agree with you. You have to find the relevant connection, right? It's not just teaching. If you're just teaching for music's sake, and there's no like purpose or relevancy that you include, then it's going to be hard for you, because you're not connecting to the purpose of the music. And that's when we get into appropriation, right? Because then the question becomes, if you're not going to teach the purpose or the context or the history, or like, if you're not going to consider the way the piece should even, because sometimes people are doing this like whitewashing, squaring up of rhythm, this kind of thing. If you're only going to do that, now you're getting into appropriation, right? So what is the point of why you're doing it? But I think when we
Right.
come from that lens of purpose and relevancy first, and then the music just helps us to have a reason to talk about this purpose and this relevancy, I completely agree with you. Then that's how we make music really be for everyone, because it's not about necessarily the person who's teaching it, their race or their culture. It's about, are you connecting to the purpose of the piece? And everybody has purpose that they can connect to, right? And that's how we keep, I think, more kids in our programs, if we show them that it's not just about learning the notes, because maybe, I mean, in some instances, teaching the music by the octavo, like, actually is appropriating that style of music. That's not how it's.
Right, right, right.
And so I
Exactly.
think people miss that point also. It was like, it's not always about learning like how to read, or sometimes it's about learning how to emote and feel.
Yeah.
And that transcends music. Like, that's not music dependent to learn how to emote and how to feel. I think music is a really unique and beautiful medium to be able to do that, though.
Yeah, that reminds me of this idea like music literacy. There was
Mm.
I was presenting at a conference. There was a clinician before me talking about music literacy, and we disagreed a little bit on on a topic. And I think oftentimes people think music literacy is like reading the pitches and the rhythms on the 5 lines and 4 spaces. Like, you are now music literate. But like
Yeah.
exactly what you just said, music literacy is, yes, reading, but like also understanding the culture, the history, being able to express the music, feeling the beat, right? Really understanding all nuances of the piece. Because I think if we apply that to English, like, I can read the words, but if I'm not comprehending, and if I can't repeat that and
Yeah.
rephrase that back to you, I haven't actually internalized that, right? And I'm actually not fully literate. So I love what you said. Music literacy is all encompassing, right? So love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I love that connection you just made between like reading, because nobody would say a child is literate if they're able to just read words, but they couldn't
Right,
retell the story. Like,
right,
nobody would
right,
agree with that.
right,
But in
right.
music, I think we're doing that all the time, where we're just focused on drilling, rhythms and pitches and playing flashcard games, and that's like what our focus of our lessons are. And we're totally missing that, like, music is really about connection, I think. Music is
Mm,
about helping us to learn about people and places and things and emotions, and develop really skills that are not only going to be useful in the
mm,
4 walls of the classroom. Because then I wonder, like, there was a time where I taught very much like that, like very much like, we're going to learn these notes and these rhythms. And I was really good at teaching kids to like
mhm,
be able to read
mhm,
notes and to be able to
right,
hear and decode. But then I also had to wonder, like, for my kids who struggle with that aspect, because I'm not adding any kind of like relevancy or purpose, like, they always had a hard time. And when I really thought, like, well, how am I making the music matter to them beyond learning these notes?
mhm,
And I feel like I personally missed some opportunities to really connect with some kids, because I was so focused on like that like traditional literacy piece.
mm,
And I was missing, like, really, literacy is big. Like, and somebody actually said to me like years ago, like, it needs to be not music literacy, but music fluency. Like, are you
mm,
fluent in music? And I
mm,
was like, oh, I like that. Like, I
mm,
think that
mm,
might be a good like reframe to how we
yeah,
consider music literacy. That it's not about just like being literate, I can read it. It's about, like, are you
mm,
fluent? Can you
right,
really speak the language of music? And I was like, that's a really great reframe. I love that. I have not like explored that idea fully yet, but I wonder
right,
if that might be another way to reframe our thinking around how we teach music, and how we make it actually be
right,
accessible for that group of kids that we never see because they don't see anything relevant for them.
right. I love that. That's a blog piece right there. Music literacy to music fluency. I see the title in
Yeah.
my head. I love
Yeah.
it.
There's a blog. I'm gonna write that down. I write that down.
Yes, I
Blog.
love it.
Yeah.
Very, very
I
cool.
love it. Yes. And then there was another thought I just had, and I also just went away. I forgot what it
Mm,
was. Oh, I know what it was. So thinking about, even for kids who don't see themselves in like the traditional middle or high school program that has a choir and a band and an orchestra, I wonder, and I know some of it is just literally logistics and like people resources. I
right.
wonder at what point are we going to really start to expand our mind past just the big three, like band, choir, and orchestra at the
Mhm,
secondary
mhm,
level. A lot of schools are starting to have like music technology kinds of things. There's a lot of mariachi programs apparently in Arizona. I
mm,
learned that, which I'm like, this is great. I love this. And so I'm loving that I'm starting to see people embracing that. If we really want all kids to have access to music in some way, we have to think about the kids that we're not seeing in our programs currently, and then how can we have some offerings that reflect them. And I think the difficult part of that, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. I think the difficult part of that, I think it's beautiful. Yeah, make a class for everybody. And that means that those kids who were like half in, half out, wishy-washy about being in your choir, they're not going to be in choir at all, because now they're going to be in the music technology class, because that's they're creating and they're producing beats and things. And so I think the difficult part is, are we willing to expand our offerings, knowing that our numbers in band, our numbers in orchestra, our numbers in choir will probably change, because now you're going to see kids who really, really want to be in those ensembles. And the kids who really want to be in music now have a way to be in a class or ensemble or offering that more reflects them. Are we willing to accept that that means our numbers are going to change in those other traditional ensembles?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
So a colleague of mine, Jory Spencer, he's a music supervisor in Florida, and he mentioned a survey to me, and I'm not sure if it was a county survey or a state survey, but he mentioned that they surveyed students to ask about their interest in traditional ensembles, and the number was surprisingly low, right? That students are no longer interested in those traditional ensembles. So I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we serving students or are we serving ourselves, right? So if we want to increase enrollment generally, there's an opportunity to add some other classes that interest those students. But also, I think there could be a pathway from those classes back into other traditional ensembles, right? So if we get students in the door, they are enjoying a class, they're enjoying what they're doing. We can talk to them, have conversations, gauge their interest, right? We might be able to kind of recruit them into some of those other ensembles, or maybe not that, do some collaborations, right? So there's a music technology class that accompanies the choir or something. But I think we can find ways to bolster the traditional experience and serve additional students, in a way that serves them best.
Yeah, I love what you said. You said, "Are we serving the students or are we serving ourselves?" And I think that's it, right? Like, I think asking, that's the difficult conversation. Are we willing to accept that in some ways we are only serving ourselves, because we're so excited about band, because we were in band and it was great, and we love marching band, but like, do kids really want to be in the marching band in your school? Are some of them like those wishy-washy kids who are just in it because they want to be in music and they don't see another offering? Or are we really thinking about, how can I just make sure that kids have access to music, period, regardless of what the exact discipline is going to be or the offering? How, as a music team, if you're a team of music teachers at your school, how as a music team can we kind of band together and maybe reimagine what our offerings are? So because I think there are still kids who want to be in the traditional ensembles, so I don't think they need to go away. I just think we need to make space for other things. And I think the more we think expansively like that, the easier it's going to be for music programs to be able to really retain kids, really attract, engage, and retain kids in the program. It's the numbers are going to look different. So the question is, are people okay with that? Are they okay with that? Or is it going to be hard to decenter oneself and accept that if we really want to serve our kids, it's going to require us to do what they're telling us they need us to do. And I think they are, like, the data is there that they're telling us, because they're not in our programs, right? Like, the data is kind of there by absence of data, I think, in some ways. And so I wonder, I mean, I guess that's the same question, is like, are we ready to really have that conversation? And in some areas, I think it's starting to happen, because I'm seeing like, oh yeah, these are really some really cool offerings. But then in other areas, I hear teachers still going on and on about, my numbers are low, it's so hard to get kids in. And I have to ask the question of like, well, I think the data is telling you that something is not right. So are you willing to confront that data and figure it out? Or do you just want to stick to the things that you think are supposed to happen?
Yeah, I love this. And and what's coming to mind now is, like, I think this all is great, and there needs to be a conversation with universities that are preparing educators, right? So are there music equity courses or units or something? Are we embedding that in our teacher preparation? And then also, are teachers prepared to teach things other than what you said, like the big three, right? Like, am I coming out of school ready to teach a music tech class, ready to teach a mariachi band class, something outside of that, really traditional major, that I majored in. So I'm guilty of it too.
Me too.
But
Yeah, me too.
so I think there's a conversation around the music teacher preparation that we can also think about too, to get ready for this new landscape that's happening. So.
Yeah, that is such a good point, that teachers have to still be prepared to do all these great things. I love that you pushed us to think a step back. Like, if we want these things to happen, we got to think back to, are they going to be prepared to do it? Are we going to have preparation programs that are making sure that teachers utilize these different kind of offerings? Because we also don't want to throw teachers into a situation and they're just drowning, because I think that perpetuates the problem that we're seeing now, where we're having a hard time keeping teachers in the classroom because they don't feel like they have what they need to live, to be able to get by and balance, their life and their career. And teachers should be able to balance both. It shouldn't be that they have to, so I don't think teachers should have to sacrifice themselves to be able to have a good program. They need support to be able to do that. And so I love that your point about, we need to make sure our teacher preparation programs are in fact doing that, to make sure that when they go in the classroom, they're ready to do more than just the big three. They've had experience, they've practiced some things. And there's great teachers that I'm seeing that are, for a variety of reasons, like their background is helping them to be able to have these offerings, right? Like there's some teachers that they are really interested in like producing music and doing music technology. So they're able to bring that. Or I love this, like the popular music bands that I'm seeing pop up in all kinds of different places, because those teachers have like a natural, like that's what they're already interested in. So how do we make that be less like a unusual thing and more like, no, this is a teacher who is certified, like me. I think I still am actually certified to teach pre-K through 12. I come out not just being able to teach band and vocal music, which is what my license is in. I think actually my license is in band music, which is ironic because I only taught band for like 2 years. I mostly taught vocal and general, which is funny. But I think that's like the point. Like, are our licenses, our preparation programs, are we coming out well-rounded teachers that can tackle teaching a variety of offerings, or are we kind of coming out with only like this little corner of understanding? And then no wonder we're not able to offer a variety of things for our kids. We don't have the foundation that we need. That's such a good point. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. And I hear that from general music teachers all the time, that not all teacher preparation programs have a robust like coursework in general music. So a lot of times teachers are coming out having like been prepared to teach band or choir or orchestra. And oh, by the way, have this one quick general music class. But then most music teacher jobs, that's kind of what it is. Like, oh, by the way, this is what's going to happen. But most music teacher jobs are elementary general music, just by nature of numbers. Like, there's just more elementary school. And so, like, one of the big questions, not questions, but big like concerns I often get from teachers is like, I was trained to be a band teacher, or I did teach band. And now in my district, we no longer have a need for 3 band teachers. So here I am teaching elementary, and I had like one little like half semester in general music. What am I supposed to do? And I think the same thing, I think the same thing could be thought of like, well, were you prepared to teach like music technology or mariachi? And I almost wonder like why not wonder? I know, because I asked somebody like, how did you learn to teach mariachi? Because one of the teachers I talked to, like, he is a white man, like he did not grow up learning mariachi, but he embraced being a student of his students and of the community, and partnered really beautifully to be able to learn. I don't think everybody is willing to do that, to be honest. Like, I think some people are not willing to partner and be vulnerable like that. So really be a student of their kids and their community. I lost my train of thought. But anyway, I think a lot of it is just not being prepared to be able to do these different offerings. And I think it still needs to happen too.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. So before we kind of wrap up, it's already been an hour. This is awesome. We can keep on going. But I love to hear your thoughts on, because I know some of the work that you do is around supporting people to have I remember when you presented in Virginia, how do you facilitate some of these more difficult conversations on topics, not necessarily like the broader systemic issues with your kids, but like topics with your kids. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what are some ways, maybe two ways. What are some ways as a teacher with your colleagues that we can kind of have some of these difficult conversations that we're kind of having now, like bigger systemic kind of issues? And how might be some ways that teachers can facilitate those with their kids when they're thinking about how do I make sure that kids are coming out of my program not just learning how to play the notes, but that we've engaged in rich, deep conversation about the purpose of our music. And sometimes that means that we have to talk about stuff like racism and sexism
Right.
and all the isms, right? Like, how do we facilitate that? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, like, colleague to colleague, how do we facilitate some of those, but also teacher to student.
Right. I mean, I think colleague to colleague, the very first step is asking questions. If I have a perspective that's different than the status quo, or I might disagree with something, my very first step is tell me a little bit about your perspective, right? I want to understand where you're coming from. And actually, I might amend that. I think the first step is some self-reflection. So you got to understand what you think, why you think that, where that's coming from, and why that new perspective might be surfacing. And then a second step would be to go to that colleague and gain understanding of where they're coming from, why they think what they think, right? And I think once you have an awareness of yourself and you understand where that colleague is coming from, there's an opportunity to then kind of collaborate or co-create some sort of next step. So I think that's advice I would give is ask questions, right? Tell them a little bit more. What about this? What about that? I think with students, you can integrate this conversation into your classroom pretty, I don't say easily, but pretty well if you think about the first layer being composers, right? So I talk about the composers and their backgrounds and not just because of the background, but like talk with your students about how that background might influence the way you perform the piece. Yeah. If you're a choir person, talk about the poet and their background and their history and how might that influence the way you perform the piece? How might the text influence the way we think about this work? And then I think if you take a facilitative approach, lean on your students' expertise, right? Ask them and don't say, hey, Black kid, tell me about the spiritual, right? But throw it back to the group. Hey, what's your experience been with singing and performing this music? What do you already know about this? What would you tell your peers and your colleagues? But lean on them to then share their own experience in a way that really strengthens your ability to teach the music. So a couple points I would give.
I love that. I love that. I'm throwing it back to the group because then it puts the cognitive load still with the kids, right? Where the kids are still having to be engaged in that thought process. Awesome. We had several like viewer comments and questions. So before we go, let's check out what some of these folks said. I see Lee Glendening-Koss joined us. So hey, Lee, thanks for being here. I think we answered, Lee was asking what is diversity, equity, inclusion. DEI, so I think we answered that before. Oh, and then Adrienne Kelly is here. Hey, Adrienne. Adrienne is a professor in Pittsburgh that I met. So thank you for being here, Adrienne. And Lauren Griffin. Oh, Lauren Griffin just loves what we're talking about. Lauren's from the Black Educators Matter podcast. Well, I have not heard of that one. But Lauren, connect with us. Let us know if there's something that you'd like to talk about in terms of Black music educators. Yeah. And then, looks like Lee has a question. Do you find that current politics are affecting how you teach? And then there's some additional. Back in the day, yes, and there are some states and some school districts and state boards of education telling teachers that they can't teach certain things, right? We know these different divisive concept laws have come out as far as what things people can say. Florida, you're in Florida, so you have, I'm sure, many thoughts and opinions about that. Florida's in the news again as far as the AP African American Studies course. And so I think, I think that before I share my thoughts, and I want to hear what you think also, Marshaun, I think politics have always affected how teachers have taught. I think the difference now is that because there's so much misinformation and like misunderstanding, almost like purposeful misunderstanding, I think as well, because certain people are trying to push their agenda, I think, harder than ever now because people are trying to actively work against it, right? That idea of there's always going to be pushback when you're trying to make change. That's just par for the course. I think the difference now, again, is that there's just more people that are actively trying to keep things the way that they were, regardless of who that serves and who maybe it doesn't serve. And so I would say yes, but I would say it's not a drastically new idea that politics are affecting. I think it's just that we're seeing kind of an unprecedented time of now it's going the next step of like laws are being passed and
Right.
people are feeling teachers are feeling rightfully so very threatened in a different way that I don't know that we've seen historically before. What are your thoughts about that?
Yes, I think this is so. We talk about systemic racism often, but I think there are some glaring examples of like overt systemic racism happening in our country, and I think it'd be difficult to refute that. I think as
Yeah.
an educator, it definitely is impacting the way people approach the classroom. So one piece of advice I would give is to take a coaching mindset or a facilitative approach to the work where you simply ask questions, right? So students are going to bring their life to the classroom rather
Yeah.
than you having to engage directly or give your opinion. Ask questions. What do you think about that? Oh, what do you make of that? What do you think? So what are you going to do with that when you leave the room, right? But just asking questions in a way that helps the students process and talk and think without you
Yeah.
having to give any opinions or thoughts.
Yeah. And I think that idea of they have to process and think is developing a muscle that we're seeing many adults have not exercised, right? Many
Hmm.
adults have not
Hmm.
exercised and developed the muscle to stop, process, think first. And we're seeing evidence of that everywhere. And so I think I love that your suggestion of take a facilitative and coaching approach and helping kids to think through this. I think it also helps them to be more reflective before being like reactive to things. Because I think that's part of the problem. We're seeing so much reaction. And we're
Yeah.
seeing less like, let me stop, let me reflect, let me process and think about what's happening and think about how I might want to respond. And I think we can accomplish both of those things at once when we think more of the facilitative approach. I love that. That makes a lot of sense.
Cool.
Yes,
Appreciate that. Thank
process
you.
and thinking is paramount. And people are not
Yeah.
doing enough of it, in my opinion, out here in these
Yeah.
streets,
Yeah.
acting all kinds of ways, just not stopping to think, right? And I think
Right.
often like sometimes I see things happening in the news and I immediately think, what if that adult, when they were in their K-12 education, had really had teachers, not just one teacher, but like teachers along their way that helped them to develop the skill of thinking and really like
Right.
stopping, reflective, and being able to make space for different thoughts that maybe are different from, like, I think that all the time of like, if we just did a better job of that in our education system, I mean, I understand why we're not doing it, right? There's systemic issues and reasons why. I understand why, but
Right.
I still think like this is the reason why I do what I do, that it's so important that we don't just teach the music, but we teach kids to go out and be well-informed citizens that can think and process and not just react off of any random internet person saying something, but they can be thoughtful and say, hey, let me think about what that person is saying
Right.
instead of just
Right.
grabbing onto it and running.
Right. Right. I love it.
Yeah. Oh,
Yes, I agree. I think, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I agree with you. I think it's a really critical skill. And I think something that if we embrace it now, in the next 20, 30 years, we might see a different, we might see a
Yeah.
different world with the students that are coming up. So.
Yeah. And I think about that a lot when I think about not just music, but like arts programs that are often cut by school boards and other folks that make those kind of decisions. I think like if 30 years ago, those school board members had an arts education, a music education that wasn't just, I don't know, their teacher playing the piano and them looking at the book or just standing
Right.
in
Right.
black tuxes and dresses and not having like
Right.
a purpose and a meaning along with the music, not a either or, but like the music and this other purpose that connected to their lives. I wonder a lot, like, would we be seeing so many arts programs being shut down, or if they can't find a teacher to fill that position, they just cut the program, and then it's that
Right.
much harder to get that program going again. Like, I wonder if 30 years ago, if those people who are the ones making the decisions now, if they had that kind of rich arts and music experience, would so many of us have to struggle and fight and advocate so hard for what we're trying to do? And so I hope that encourages those of you who are listening to keep it up, because I think the more that we let up the gas, I think, of like advocating for our programs and showing that what we do matters, right? So we can't just do pretty concerts. We have to demonstrate that it's life
Right.
skills and things that we're doing. I
Right.
think that that's the work that we really have to keep our eye on, because it could be very easy for somebody to come in and like swoop and their program is gone if they don't see that meaning. We have to keep our focus on that for sure.
Yeah. Love
Even
it.
with all these difficult conversations that we have
Yes.
to have. I love it. I love it. Well, I know we could continue to talk forever and ever, but I want to kind of wrap us up. And so I wanted to leave some time for you, Marshaun. I know you're doing lots of great work and you have got a book and other things going on. And so I wanted to give you a chance just to share the things that you've got going on.
Yes, I am making my way around a couple states. So if you are in a different state, look out for me. I'll be in Texas this week, this weekend at the Texas Music Educators Association. I'll be in Bellevue, Washington the following week at I think it's NAFME Northwest Conference. I'll be in Tennessee coming up. I'll also be in New York, Rochester, New York for the NFAME Eastern Conference, and New Jersey. So I'll be in New Jersey if you are in the state of New Jersey. So come and see me at one of those conferences. And then also, again, I am the co-founder and managing partner for True Change Alliance, and we are planning our Q2 and Q3. So if you need any support, reach out to me, and happy to see how we can support you.
Yeah, awesome. Doing so many great things. I love it. And I'm going to see you at some of those places. So I'm excited that we'll get to connect again. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Awesome. All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap up this episode of the Music Equity Chat Show. To all of our listeners that I still see some of you are here with us live, and I know many of you are watching after the fact. Thank you so much for listening in. If you have not already, make sure that you click the subscribe button on the YouTube channel so you can follow me. And you can also follow me on any of your social media platforms on all the places, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all of them. And make sure that you also share this episode, this important talk that Dr. Marshaun and I had today. Make sure you share it with a music educator that you know needs to hear this message. And like I said, the best way to keep up with me and my work is to make sure that you're on my email list. I do send a weekly notes email newsletter every Friday morning out to my list of different resources that I'm coming across as I'm making sure that I continue to grow as an educator and a consultant supporting music teachers all across our country. So make sure you're on my list. It comes out 9 a.m. Eastern Friday mornings. I also send out whenever I write new blog posts or have new episodes of this show. You can join that list by going to my website, www.ashleycuthbertson.com. So thank you again, Marshaun. This was so wonderful. Thank you so much for engaging with me and coming on and just having this chat with me. I really appreciate it. And everybody out there, I will see you next time on the Music Equity Chat Show. All right, bye.